Good evening, everybody. Today we go live with the Women Inspiring Network, and we have with us Amrita Chaudhary, our WIN ambassador, as well as Nayanika Mahtani joining us from UK. As you all know, the journey of Women Inspiring Network, we've had a great journey in the last 5 months, having a 10 million reach, and our Winning Mind series, conceptualized by Amrita Chaudhary, is doing extremely well. And we're really proud of our film series, which we've done. And we've done a series with IIT, which is Sustainability, Fashion, and Technology, Women Entrepreneurship with Jai Hind. We've got 100 positive voices of women on our platform and reaching 10 million, which has given us a lot of inspiration and motivation. So I'd like to sum it up by saying we are an inspirational storytelling platform which creates, inspires, and shares women with women, and it's a movement to pay it forward. A little bit about Amrita. She's author of the two best-selling fiction book, Faking It and Breach, and she's contributed to the Chicken Soup for the IIT and Soul. She writes a lot on and speaks on business, technology, governance, and lifestyle issues for a variety of media channels, digital platforms, event platforms, and government think tanks. She's also on the board of many companies, and she holds a degree from IIT Kanpur as well as Berkeley, an MBA, and an avid traveler. She has visited 45 countries. She lives in Mumbai with her family. So over to you, Amrita, for your conversation with Nayanika, and please introduce her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuti. So we're delighted here to be with you, with Nayanika as our guest for the day. Winning Minds as a platform is an experiment and an idea to bring together very talented, very passionate, achievement-oriented women, content creators, writers, podcasters, bloggers, what have you, to share with you their stories, what made them who they are, what makes them tick. So without much ado, let me just introduce Nayanika. Nayanika is a very special person. She brings the best of the left brain and the right brain. As a management graduate from IIM Bangalore, she's worked as a banker in the UK and in Africa. And then she took a veer into her creative journey, which has been fabulous for her, and we'll learn more about her journey today. But she's the author of multiple books. She started out with her first book, Ambushed, which is a children's fiction book, followed by the gory story of Genghis Khan, again, a children's fiction book. Her latest book is a young adult book of fiction called Across the Lines. And she's also a screenwriter. She wrote the script for the movie Shakuntala Devi, which just released, and I think we've all seen it and loved it. And she's in the midst of more books, more film scripts, and she's also a very multifaceted woman because she's a mother. She's runs her family. She's a pet owner. So we'll learn more about Nayanika today. Nayanika, welcome.
Thank you so much, Amrita. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you for reaching out to me.
Fantastic to have you. So Nayanika, tell us a little bit about your journey, what were your motivations, your early inspirations, and you chose a traditional career before you found your love for creativity. So what do you think, in hindsight, what do you think about this path and this transition?
So, Amrita, I think the career I chose happened because it was meant to be. And I think everything that has happened since has also happened because it has meant to be. I really believe that there is a plan, a time for everything that happens. I always was interested in storytelling. So growing up, my father had a transferable job. So we shifted many cities. So I was always the outsider in a sense. And I think I would find refuge in stories and books. It was my way in. And even though the longest stint was in Kolkata, after Kolkata, when we moved to New Delhi for high school, again, I was this outsider, and I thought, I joined the Dramatic Society exactly for that. I was quite a shy child. And it was really, really fortunate because there was this young girl, at that time she must have been 20 or 21 or something, and she came from London and she was with Theatre Action Group. And she was looking for high school students to act in this play called Stepping Out, which was basically a play about youngsters stepping out into the big world. And she actually enrolled, the good part was whoever was selected, she got us to write the play with her, adapt it from an existing screenplay, and give music to the, it was a musical. So help with the music and the lyrics and all of that. And this was my first entry into this world of musical theater. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is what I want to do with my life. Little did I know that life had a different script in store for me. But actually, the person giving the music for that play was Loy Mendonça, who went on to become Shankar Ehsaan Loy. And he was just lovely, the way he involved all of us. And so after that experience, when we put that play up at Kamani Auditorium, and I actually joined Theatre Action Group, and I thought I would study drama. But my father at that point, he sort of intervened and he said that, are you sure you want to do this? And, I know you love dramatics. And he himself had acted in Shakespeare and, all of that. And he said, why don't you do this? Why don't you get financially independent? And then you can steer your life any course you want. And I agreed. I mean, I just went with the flow. And that's when I went to IIM Bangalore, and then I joined Grindlays and then JP Morgan Chase and all of that. So, life just takes you in its stride. And I loved it. I loved that financial independence. I loved the fact that, it's not like I have any regrets about the way my life went. I loved that experience as well. And I think every experience sort of prepares you, especially as a storyteller. There is so much I have drawn on my past experiences. You've done that too with Faking It. So there is so much you draw on from past experiences. I think it's one of those careers where even talking to you, or my daughters keep saying, Mama, I know what you're doing. You're observing people, and you're going to be, it's going in there. I know that expression on your face. So every experience is sort of, it's getting unconsciously filed away somewhere to be drawn on someday.
Absolutely. It gets layered, right? In
it
your
gets
mind.
layered, yeah.
Yes.
So I didn't fully answer your question. So when, I worked in Mumbai as a banker, and then we went to Africa. And then from there, I just happened to audition one day on a lark for screenwriting, for actually storytelling with Sesame Street Network, New York. And I got selected, and I started writing, not for their television, but for outreach for children who didn't have access to television. And I loved it. I loved finding what it is that can get a child engaged. Basically anyone engaged, but in this case, it was a child. Mm-hmm. And from there, because my daughters were young at the time as well, I thought, hey, why don't I do this? Because I love it so much. And my daughters were both under the age of I think 2 at the time. And I didn't have a support system in Africa. So this allowed me to be with them, be at home, write. And so that's where the journey started from.
That's fantastic. And it's beautiful how these serendipitous moments occur in our lives, where you reach out to somebody and they respond back to you. And, that opens up a new avenue. Absolutely. And a new thread in life altogether. Right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. So, you started answering this question of why children's book and why Ambushed. So I'm what's the story from Sesame Street to Ambushed? What was that journey like?
So, Amrita, that wasn't planned again. It happened. I think stories choose us. Ambushed happened because of a picture I saw in the National Geographic of a tiger and a jailed poacher. And there was something in that photograph, in their eyes, that told me they both are trapped and they are voiceless, and they are reaching out to someone, anyone, to tell their story. And I think I just happened to be the one that was there, and I couldn't get rid of the, I think every story happens because there is some voice in your head that does not get silenced. And either, so I started researching about poaching, and I was absolutely horrified that all this was happening while we are so consumed by, getting the bigger house and the bigger car and the next, higher score on the Wii or whatever we're doing. And that's the core of this story, that it's about a girl called Tara, who's a young child growing up in Bombay in a very digital world, but it's equally applicable to me, because I am this adult who is doing exactly the same thing. And it's no wonder that the children are doing that, because they're aping us. So there are these tigers who are dying in the wild, but we don't care. And it's also about showing a child or showing anyone that the thrills of the natural world far exceed any thrills that we could get from a video game or anything we do virtually. So it's about this girl who goes, she's taken by her father, who used to be a banker, and hint, hint, quit his job to do something like become a photographer with National Geographic. And he takes her sort of against her will on this holiday to a tiger reserve. And she's like preparing herself for the most boring holiday ever, because all her friends are going to Disney World or, Iceland or somewhere like that. And she then stumbles upon this gang of poachers. It's up to her to save the lives of a tigress and her cubs. The only person who she can trust is this boy who's the son of a poacher. Can she trust him really? Or, will they save the tigers and will they need saving themselves? So it was that. But the core of it was the story that really spoke to me was, what I mentioned earlier, that we are living in these bubbles and the world around us is not being taken heed of.
Absolutely. And I think when you're writing children's fiction, perhaps more so than other fiction, is there a lens at the back of your mind that you need to be giving a message to the younger generation? Because, you're able to shape their thoughts, their ideologies, their worldview through fiction. Right?
Yeah, but that's a very terrifying thought. So I don't go there. So my thing is, I just write what I think would be engaging for me to read, because I think that child in me is still there. And then I show it to my daughters and they actually come and they're the most harsh critics ever. So, if it appeals to them and me, and then of course my editor and everybody else, but I don't think, in fact, I think children are far better human beings than we are, because they're just, there's no lens of judgment or sort of, they're so much more open-minded. They're so much they're better human beings. I am just happy that there are children in this world. So I think the only thing is to point them in the direction sort of away from aping us to doing things perhaps differently, and to point them in the direction and giving them things to think about. I think that's what we could do as parents or teachers or just writers or, but I think it's all there. They are so good at taking in this world and making what they will of it.
Absolutely. I think there's a sea change in the way kids are aware of certain issues, especially the environment and ecology and sustainability, a lot more than what we were. But even the intervening generations in the middle were not as aware of the world around them as these kids today are. So it's fantastic to be able to see who they are. But let's pick up on that point of what you said, that kids are the harshest critics, right? So what does it take to write for children? What special elements, what kinds of humor, what kinds of narrative do you need to, craft so that you entertain and retain your readers?
So to write for children, I think it is harder, because a child's attention span is shorter, I think. So an adult will skip through 3 or 4 boring pages, but a child will drop the book and run. So it is, I think, harder to write for children, but I don't think, I've written now for young adults and children and, a script, I don't think I've sort of thought of it too differently. I will say that when we write for children, if we sort of assume that they can process even difficult, hard things, because yes, they're children and childhood is supposed to be this place of joy, but the fact is, it isn't always, so there are things that I find books are a lovely way to gently ease into a conversation that otherwise may be difficult. And like you said, it could be a conversation that is uncomfortable. It could be a conversation that you wouldn't otherwise have. So then you hide behind these characters and you say, this is the story. It's not you and me, it's these characters. And I find that a beautiful way to explore grief, or, you know, puberty, or just growing up and all the stuff that goes with it, or even prejudice. And, you know, there is so much. And it's not that it just affects adults, it affects the children. They may not know, find the words to express it to you, or they may not know how to bring it up with you. But I think if we could write and include them and not think, oh, this is not meant for you, you know. And I would rather, I mean, I've been told off so many times, even growing up, and I used to pick up anything and read. And I don't think my parents ever had that, you know, oh, this is not for you. If I happened to pick up something that wasn't appropriate, they would say, you know, come here and let's talk about it. And that's what I've tried to do with my girls as well. So I think I haven't written differently for children. Of course, there are some things you don't go into because it would be, you know, sort of not appropriate at that time. So, you know, yes. But overall, I think, you know, it's a great way to get them into the fold of whatever you're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it's amazing that kids have all these emotions. And with this whole movement of, like, you know, looking at the mental health of children, and, you know, it's important to have stories which explore not just fun, entertainment, adventure, but, like, you know, some of these other darker things, friendship, breaking of friendships, like, you know, things like that, that kids,
absolutely,
right? Yeah. That's fantastic. So let's you know, talk a little bit about your second book. And you know, authors often go back to their own roots to find stories, to write books. And Ambush, like, you know, set in India, sort of follows in that path. And then, like, you know, comes in like your second book, which is about, like, you know, Mongols and, like, the Mongolian history. And, like, you know, it's a narrative, like, you know, across, like, you know, as the Mongols went from the steppes to, like, you know, all the countries around the world that they went to. So why them? What happened? What inspired you? What triggered that?
So after I wrote Ambushed, everybody told me, can we have a sequel? Almost everybody, you know, another adventure that Tara goes on. And that's what I had planned to do. But then Genghis Khan just came galloping into my head and conquered the territory in my brain and refused to budge. And I think it started, Amrita, because I was looking for, because my daughters were growing up in the UK and they were learning a lot about the history here, but they didn't know that much, anything really about Asian history. So I was looking for interesting characters to slip some stories in for them. And when I came across Genghis Khan, he really fascinated me for many reasons, but the main reason being that here was this boy who at the age of, I think it was 9, lost his father. He is exiled, he's illiterate. His father is a tribe elder. He's thrown out of the tribe with his mother and his siblings, etc. But he doesn't give up. He says, I mean, any other child might have said, okay, you know, this is it. He goes on to become the greatest conqueror the world has ever seen. He conquers like 16% of the world's of the world with only his horses. To put that in perspective, the British conquered, I think it was something like 24%, but they had, like, you know, ships and tanks and all of that. So here's this man with his horses and a band of men with him, his soldiers, who manages to conquer like 16% of the world's territory. And he is unschooled. So I wanted to know, from just a storyteller's point of view, what was the motivation that this boy had? And the other thing was that there was such, I mean, 90% of the world said that he was this bloodthirsty conqueror. But then in Harvard, there was this you know, sort of business case study done on him, where he is seen as one of the world's greatest leaders. So I was like, let me just travel back to the 12th century and find out for myself what was going on. And it's sort of, you know, when you say you look for the emotional core of the story, that core of the story came from a place where I think there is so much polarization and prejudice, and there is no space for differing opinions. And I think it came from a place which inside of me was like, can we have a different point of view? I mean, history depends on who is telling the story. So can we at least give a hearing to these other points of view? And I started researching these other points of view, and it was fascinating. So of course he was bloodthirsty. Of course he was. He killed 11% of the world's population. But equally, there were so many things that we didn't give him credit for, because the story was told not from a Mongolian point of view, or not even from, Marco Polo's point of view is quite sort of revealing, and I read the Persian point of view, which was again quite revealing, and the Chinese point of view. So I, sort of wanted to give a story to children which tells them about history, gives them fun facts about history without making it seem like history, and also prompts them to think about the fact that there could be more than one point of view about anything. And this was just my way of sort of hoping to slide it in there.
So there's a lot of threads over there to pick up on, Nayanika. So let me start with a few. One, obviously this point of view and this perspective is really important, right? And I recall, I happened to meet at a business conference a lady from Mongolia, this is a few years back. And when you meet somebody from Mongolia, the first person that comes into your mind is, of course, Genghis Khan. And there is a certain perception that we all have of him. And he's a national hero in Mongolia, right? So what was the reception for the book? Because sitting in London, and I think you mentioned in the British Museum and in the historical texts that exist in Britain, he's perceived in a particular way, and here you are bringing a different point of view. What was the reception, both in kids and in adults?
Amrita, the reception was so heartening. Like I said, kids, of course, will accept it wholeheartedly, but even the adults. And, in London itself, at the Jaipur Fest, they had a session on Meet the Mongols. And I thought, in fact, Namita Gokhale suggested that, it would be lovely if you have a Mongolian person on the stage with you. And so I reached out to friends, and, it's so lovely. Women Inspiring Network is really the story of all our lives, because like you helped me with Ambushed, giving me feedback. There's another friend of mine, Resham, who put me in touch with the EBRD over here, who had, like you're saying, Mongolian businesswomen on, working with them. And they put me in touch with another lovely Mongolian lady who was more than happy to, she heads the European Commission of Mongolian women. And she and her daughter came onto the stage with me, and they said, thank you for telling our story from this point of view, because like you said, he is a hero in Mongolia, because for the first time, Mongolia was a tribe of warring, was a nation of warring tribes. He united them into Mongolia. And even for the larger world, for the first time, Asia and Europe were united. He revived the Silk Road. There was the exchange of ideas, of trade, of language, of so much, that we don't attribute to him. He actually was a feminist. He championed women's rights. He believed in, upholding all religions. Now, I didn't know all of this, and I thought it was fantastic. He introduced, a script for the Mongolians, which is in use still today, even though he was illiterate himself. So even though he conquered all these places, there isn't a single statue in his lifetime of him. He didn't want a big tomb. He lived in a little, sort of gear, that circular tent, and he died in one. So all the money that he got from his conquests went into building roads and connecting his little land, remote land, with the rest of the world. That's what he did. So his legacy for the Mongolians is phenomenal. So it was lovely to see the reception it got. I, in fact, got invited to the House of Lords thanks to Genghis Khan, because, that Trade Commission, they were so, they were just so grateful that someone was telling their story. And even when I went to Bhutan for another Lit Fest, now there aren't many protagonists who look like Genghis Khan. You know what I mean? So for those children, when I showed them the cover, I have the cover here, in fact, when I showed them the cover of the book, and they could see somebody whose features were like them and who had done horrible things, but he had done nice things as well. And it's just nice to have somebody who looks like you, right? Because you've always read stories or seen stories about people who don't really look like you. So it's just nice to feel like there's a story about our part of the world.
That's fantastic, because in every country where authors, and especially authors in English language, come for the first time, it opens up dialogue both ways, right? It opens up to that country, and it opens that country up to the world, into the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the process and the structure of this book, because this obviously required a lot of research. How long did it take? How did you manage the research? And then how do you condense all of that research into engaging little stories that youngsters can absorb and love and be entertained by?
So the research, the British Library was a godsend. So I started my Bible, literally, for the research was a book called The Secret History of the Mongols, which was written in the 12th century. And I expected this to be glorifying Genghis Khan, but it wasn't, even though it was written by his written on the instructions of his descendants. But it said things like, he was scared of dogs, petrified of dogs, and he had his half brother killed. So it didn't glorify him. It I was quite heartened by the fact that it was saying things which were not really showing him in a very positive light. So that was the Mongol version. Then I read also the Persian version by a vizier in the Ilkhanate Sultanate, and that gave me the Persian version. Then I read the Travels of Marco Polo, the translated version of the Travels of Marco Polo, which of course was slightly later because he traveled in Kublai Khan's time, but again it gave you an insight into that world. And the Baburnama was a fantastic resource, again, because the Mongols and the Mughals are related, of course. And at the back of the book, I have a family tree. And the Mughals, of course, we've grown up in India, so we've sort of studied them. But I wanted my girls also to know that there is a connection. And the day I found that missing link, because there was like all these generations, and the day I found that missing link, I actually stood up in the British Library and I did a little jig, and then I didn't return for a few days because everybody was like, this girl is a little crazy here. But yes, so there were all these different versions that I took into account. And then, of course, history is somebody's version. So then after all this, it was my version, but I didn't want it to be a history kind of thing. So that's where I dipped into banking, and I made it like Genghis Khan has these roundtable conferences every Friday for his soldiers, and they discuss different strategies and tactics. So it became like this sort of, like we used to have these meetings in the bank. So it became like that sort of thing, but the dress was smart casual. And all these soldiers are sort of, getting Genghis Khan's words of wisdom. And because he was unschooled, he used to give a lot of his instructions, this is from my research, in rhyme to his soldiers, because they were all illiterate. So I used rap for the children. So there's this whole rap version happening to make it, to draw children in and get them to read the story. And the response was so lovely.
So how much do you have to think of, an oral storytelling technique when you're writing for children? Is it important? Is it there at the back of your mind?
So for me, Amrita, I don't know why it happens that I always see stories like I see it. It's visual. And in this case, it's written like a play. It's written it's written like a drama.
Sure.
So I don't know why that happened. It just happened. It's just the way it flowed out. So there were scenes and it was written like that. And I saw it like that. So that's how it came. And I didn't plan it. It just happened that way. So Ambush was completely different. And then this was completely different. Mm-hmm. It just organically felt right that way.
Now that's, it seems really fantastic. Now let's move into the young adult fiction, right? Like your latest book, Across the Lines. And so a lot of stories about partition are very emotional because obviously it was a time of great trauma for so many people. And you're looking at it from a different lens. You're bringing in two different timelines, like today and 1947, and you're bringing in multiple countries. You're throwing in cricket. So what were you thinking? I mean, it's looks like a masala, like multiple threads, moving into the story.
So again, Amrita, you're right. This is a deeply personal story because I think it was an unfinished conversation with my grandfather. Both my sets of grandparents were impacted by the partition, and growing up, I didn't really. We didn't ever talk about the partition. There were a lot of things they said about their youth in, Rawalpindi and Sargodha and Lahore and all of that, but there was never any conversation about the partition itself. And I think the only one time when my grandfather actually sort of brought it up when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I didn't finish that conversation. And it was a time when he broke down and he cried while reading out a passage from Manto's book, Manto's short story, Toba Tek Singh. And I didn't know, he was with me, he was reading, he broke down, he cried. I didn't know what to do. I went and called my grandmother, and she comforted him like he was a little boy, like a little child. And she just said in Punjabi, "Chaddo, mitti pao," like just let it go. And I, instead of ever taking that thread of conversation up with him again, I just hid that book because I never wanted to see him cry again. In my head, he was this, person who had fought for our independence. He had braved lathi charges. He had been to jail. I had never seen him vulnerable. And I didn't want to see him vulnerable, I think, in my head. And so when I actually found the words, as I say, the words find you at some stage in your life. And I think I found the words very late in my life. I wish I'd found them earlier. But then I didn't want to make it a story about pain. I wanted it to be a story of hope. And I wanted it to draw in people like my children, daughters, so who I wanted to draw in the young adults because at 15 and 17 years old. So I thought of protagonists, one Pakistani girl who's 15 who wants to be a cricketer, and an Indian boy who's 14 and who wants to be a chef, because in my head, food and cricket are the two things that cut across borders of this India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. There are two things that, really cut across borders. Third, maybe being film. And so the story came from there. Then it moves between, as you said, London, Rawalpindi and New Delhi, because those are I thought the meeting ground could be London, because when my daughters were growing up here, some of their closest friends are Pakistani. And some of my closest friends are Pakistani. And I just said, hey, why are we giving in to this hatred? It doesn't need to be. We need to tell other stories. We don't need to just keep hearing that story of hatred. So this was my attempt, as a tribute to what I think was a generation of quiet heroes, the millions of, including my grandparents and a lot others who made that journey, erased their past, and just gave their life to building our future without ever having the chance to even, have the space for grief. It was just like, partition coincided with independence, and independence took center stage. And that was it. And the second thing was to hopefully build a bridge between, all of us in a world that is so bent on building walls wherever we look. So this was that attempt. And it came from a place of hope, because I can't write sad stories. I can't, just as a person, I can't deal with it. There's enough sadness. So I wanted it to be about hope. And the hope came from these two intercutting storylines, as you said, where they meet and an old story gets unraveled, a story that began in 1947. And so there's the set of grandparents and the set of these two youngsters. And we just look at the story through both eyes of youngsters impacted by the partition, because the partition still impacts us.
Yes, it does.
It lives on. We can look away, but it does.
I know it's amazing how much these geographic lines change lives. So I, from my husband's side, they faced a similar story and a situation on the Bangladesh border. And we took my father-in-law to Bangladesh. This was like a few years back, and
Right.
it's just amazing, like what connects people even today, right? And when we went back, I mean, I've never been there. I have no association with the country, but just the warmth that people show you is amazing, because at a human-to-human level, it's really about the things that connect you.
I can't even tell you how true that is, Amrita. The reception in Pakistan, there was a professor who's teaching at Habib University, Karachi, who's the co-founder of the Karachi Lit Festival. And he, he's using my book. He wanted to use my book as part of, he's teaching a course on the partition and using this as, a part of his course. And I felt so heartened by that. And there's another filmmaker called Sharmeen Obaid Chinoy. She's Oscar winning. And she gave such a lovely, 2 lines about my story. So this is what I mean. We need to share stories. It's the only way forward.
Yeah. And tell it in a way so that, the kids today who have no memory and no recollection and no framework to even view these events, how do you make them connect with it, right? So let me ask you, what did your daughters think of the story?
So I think there were days they would come back after school, and I would be weeping, and they would most of the time just be like, "Oh God, is she menopausal? What is going on with her?" But this story really, I think I needed to write this. And for them, it's also, this is the last window we have, Amrita, with that generation. It's 70 years plus since partition. In a few years, we'll have no firsthand survivors to tell the story. So if we don't put these stories down somewhere, they're gone. You like in the Holocaust, or there is such a celebration of the struggle, and you have to honor it. You have to honor what they went through, and it's important because you have to know where they came from to appreciate what they've done for you, and where you're going. So I think it's very, very important to have that. So for my daughters too, my grandmother's eldest surviving sibling is called Toshi, and she's the one who was in the story. And I told her, "You're going to be in my story." And she passed away just a few months after the book came out. But even for my daughters to, have Toshi Masi in the story was like, she'll be there forever. And now they can connect so many things with her. My grandfather had a tattoo on his forearm. It was Tarlok. It was the name of his best friend growing up. And he died in the partition. I didn't know this. But somewhere Tarlok came into my consciousness after so many years, and he's the other boy in the story. So, you sort of, when I talk to my daughters about all these family stories, they sort of now make more sense, if that makes sense. And the important thing, I think, is there's so many children, because there were so many people, 14 million people impacted by partition. So there are so many children out there who perhaps need to hear these stories.
I think it's very heartening to be able to communicate and share such complex topics, themes, right? So let's delve a bit into your writing process and your writing style, and how do you what do you have to keep in mind when you're bringing these complex things? Is it? Obviously, it's got to be written in a simpler fashion than what you would write for adults. Right? But what else? What else do you have to keep in mind as you're crafting the story for children?
So I think, firstly, for me, I have to allow myself to be vulnerable, because it's a process of finding the core. And the more honest you are, it's sort of, I think every story is a process of finding why the story found you at this point and why you're writing it. And once you find that emotional core of the story, everything flows out of there. And every beat should actually relate to that should take it forward with that in mind. And I don't think I consciously at least made an effort to make it simpler, because I was now writing, I mean, even adults have read it and, sort of it's resonated with all age groups. But I think what I wanted to do was this journey, the arc of, seeing the partition through the eyes of these two youngsters, and then also seeing it through the eyes of these two older people. And the transformation journey, the realization, that's what I wanted to capture in this story. And to do it in a way where it isn't sort of, you're not concentrating on the gory bits of it. So it's this story about these two teenagers who meet. And, it takes into account even the little bit of gender stereotype, because she wants to play cricket, he wants to be a chef. They're both facing their own grief on that account. And then what do they learn from, just facing up to prejudice, facing up to, because there's a lot of stuff you can take away if you delve into it. The context may be different, but yes, there are so many layers. And that's what my attempt was, Amrita.
So what comes to you first, the story or the characters?
So I think it's always the idea, I think it could happen either way, but I think it's always that one thing that, for instance, that one thing that holds my imagination. So it would be that, and then I would,
this core that you're talking about, right? Like
yeah,
emotional core that you're talking about. And do you structure it? Do you have a process of crafting out chapters, or is it more organic in your mind? It sort of flows. Do you pre-plan a lot of things?
I don't. I think the structure comes from the characters and their evolution, and it's just a way of checking in to see that how is the arc going. So the structure just helps me check in and make sure that we are going somewhere with the story. Otherwise, sometimes you can just get carried away with writing, which isn't really taking the story anywhere. So that's my way. I mean, there are many ways, I guess. Everyone has what works for them, but that's my way of going about it.
So how was from writing books of fiction, from writing books, you moved into film, right? And Shakuntala Devi. Now you've written about a historical figure before, so maybe there were some lessons that you carried from there, but also you had a protagonist who's there, and I think I read some interviews where you were interacting with her and meeting, Shakuntala Devi's daughter. So what is it like, writing for movies, and what do you need to do when you're writing about people who are with us and they're there to accept or not accept the story?
So again, she had come to my school, Shakuntala Devi, when I was about 6 years old in Kolkata, and she, when you talk about somebody just leaving their mark, she really left her mark. So it was like a show. She was a show person. It wasn't just about doing sums quickly. I mean, amazing sums, admittedly, but it just wasn't about that. It was about drawing in the audience. She owned her audiences, and that's what stayed with me. So that show stayed with me. And then in 2015, Ambushed came. 2016, when I was thinking about, the next story to write, this was a story that came to mind, because here's this Indian woman born in the 1920s who, she's the hero of the story. And what is her superpower? It's mathematics. And she is unschooled. And she, again, it's a little bit like Genghis Khan, unschooled, goes on to conquer the world. And inspires millions of girls and boys and everybody around the world. And yes, you're right. In this case, because Shakuntala Devi had passed away in 2013, so we had to get permission from her next of kin, which you said rightly, her daughter, and we had extensive conversations with her. So happily, as it happened, a friend of mine was a director, and she said, let's do a film on her. Let's not go don't go the book route, let's do the film. And I hadn't ever done a film, but like I said, I think I tend to think visually. So it wasn't so hard making the switch to writing like that. Of course, I, read up a lot and sort of about the difference between screenwriting and writing for books. It is very different. And then when we met with Shakuntala Devi's daughter, she also happened to be based in London. So imagine the odds of all three of us based in London, all looking to tell the same story. That's why I say stories choose their timing and their tellers. And as we spoke with her, Amrita, I think the story revealed itself, because apart from just being this arc of a child to champion, amazing story as it was, there was this added layer of seeing it through a mother-daughter lens, because the emotional core for me, the beating heart of the story, was the realization that your mother is also a woman, and she has her own aspirations and her own struggles and her own baggage and her own challenges, and she is trying her best in her roles as a woman, just like you are.
Sure.
And that, it was just this moment where I said, this is the core of the story. This is going to inform everything else in the story. So our film starts with that and it ends with that. So it's a realization for the daughter and the mother. And everything else in the story was, of course, there's the intercutting arc of her amazing journey as a calculating prodigy, but how her worldview is informed by her relationship with her parents, and especially the resentment against her mother when she was little, Shakuntala Devi's. And the same thing happens when you look at Anu Banerjee's relationship with her mother, and how she digs her heels deep into domesticity because her mother has been away. And she wants this normal life because her mother has had anything but a normal life. And, it's how we crave what we miss. So that became and I thought that was so relatable. It's relatable to a genius, but it's also relatable to me. So I could feel that, and many of my friends, and I think all working mothers have experienced it, or even stay-at-home mothers have experienced it. Any mother has experienced it, any daughter has experienced it, So that became something that we really wanted to tell. And the other thing was, I was just in awe of this lady who, I've worked in investment banking. I've seen the boys' club at work. I'm sure all of us have at some point. And here was this woman who didn't let her gender or her ethnicity define what she did with her life. She just took her gift, owned it, and did the best she could. And, I can just imagine an Indian woman in the 1950s in the very white male world of mathematics, trying to make a dent, trying to make some place for herself, and being mocked and being called a freak show. But she just didn't let that define her. And how inspiring is that? So that was the story that we really, really wanted to tell.
When I saw the movie, I had gone in without knowing much about the story. And I think what I took away from it was this emotional side, which I had not anticipated. But obviously it then it sort of looms over the story and it crafts the story.
Amrita, and I think we owe it to the next generation, because there is so much burden on a woman, I think, and I don't know what you think about it, but there is so much pressure to be perfect around chapatis, perfect mother, perfect house, perfect daughter-in-law, perfect children, perfect on Facebook and social media, perfect holidays, perfect life. Where are we going with all this perfection? Why can't we just be human? And why can't we just celebrate the fact that we've tried? Why do we have to be perfect? And if we just, this mental health that we're talking about, I think partly stems from this over obsession with perfection. And I think it's more for girls. My elder daughter was in a girls' school, and now she's recently shifted to a co-ed school, and she talks about the boys having, they put up their hands and they say, they volunteer answers, and they're so ready, even if they don't know. But girls will wait 150% to be so sure of the answer before they even put their hand up. Recently in our Citibank, for the first time, has a female CEO, and I was reading one of her interviews, and even she was saying, I would hesitate till I was 150% sure of the fact that I can take on this job before I take it. Why? A man wouldn't think twice. He would just put his hand up and say, hey, I need, stock options and this and that. And we're so scared about talking about anything, we don't feel we deserve. And that needs to change. And Shakuntala Devi was out there changing all these paradigms for us. So her story really needs to be heard, I think.
She was really a woman ahead of her times in many different ways, right? And it's not just perfection. I think it's sometimes this idea that you view women and mothers through a different lens than you view dads and fathers, right? And
absolutely. So Anu Banerjee didn't have the sort of same resentment that her father wasn't on the scene. Or I'm sure any mathematician, scientist, even in our own families, when the father is away, it's okay. But if the mother is away, it's like, oh my God, what a bad mother. There's totally different
stereotypes that need to be explored, and they're changing, but I think it reiterates every generation, unfortunately, right? Mm-hmm. So even when women break it, what you're talking about, Anu Banerjee, it was very prevalent in the young girls who grew up, for example, in the 1990s, who had seen their mothers in the US and in Europe being trailblazers at work. They all went back, a whole generation of women went back saying, we want to be homemakers, right? In reaction. Right. And then the generation after that, wants to change it again. So it's sort of amazing how it goes in waves, right?
Yes.
But tell me, you've had this fantastic, journey through the creative world. You've, reached out to publishers. You've been there in, various forums, multiple platforms. What does it take, right? It's not just about writing. It is about being out there. It is about connecting, communicating, not just storytelling, but building the friendships, the networks. What does it take, and how can a new author learn from you?
Okay, I'm the last person anyone should learn all this from. I'm so rubbish at all this. So that's the bit I don't really love. I love being sitting behind, tucked away somewhere, with my words. But sort of more than that, I hate talking about, the fact that please come and read the book and buy the book. But my daughters tell me, now you've cut so many trees to have the book published. Now, please, somebody should at least buy it. So that's now my new motivation. But yes, it's very important, and especially more so now, where everything is, you have to really clamor for attention, for getting people to look at your book and your film or your book or whatever it is. And it's an important part, unfortunately, of you just have to do it. And I'm getting there. I'm slowly getting there, hopefully.
You've done really well in that. But if you were to look at younger women authors, and if they were to ask you, right? And this is very different for a generation, when you said that your father said, okay, pursue the traditional career. You can go back to creativity. And I can really identify with that because I've heard the same story, right? So I've followed my traditional paths, gone into creativity, veered back into traditional again. But young women today are willing to take chances. What would you tell them? When, should they take a chance on creativity? Is it a calling? Should they follow it at age 15, or should they follow the advice that you received of following traditional paths and then getting back into it? What do you think?
I think it's a different world today, Amrita. I think, the world we grew up in was very different. The opportunities are different. I would say just follow your heart. Just follow your heart. And it's perfectly okay not to know. I mean, I see this with lots of girls, and it's absolutely fine, girls, boys, youngsters, not to know what it is that you really want to do. And it's fine to explore different avenues. Now I think the world is so different. I was reading this book called Range by David Epstein, where he talks about why generalists flourish or do really well in a specialized world. And it's because anything that you do is never, I don't think there's anything like being wasted. There are different portfolios of experience that you can have. So follow your heart. I think when your heart is in it, you will do well at it. So, and you just go with the flow, follow your heart. If your heart tells you, of course, you have to make sure that you can put food on the table. But that's a very important part of it. I'm not saying disregard that completely, but if you can, have some sort of financial stability, do some sort of, like I used to do copywriting on the side for a long time because it didn't, a book and a film takes long. So I used to do copywriting to keep that annuity income coming in, if you will. So it's important. Of course, you shouldn't just say, I'm going to wait for this to happen, but definitely follow your heart. And it's a different world today. I think there's so much opportunity.
And I see today, like, youngsters going in and out of jobs and careers as well. So they go back to work for a few years, come back and, go off to Italy or Bhutan and write a book and then go back to work. So it's, but what is required? I think what's required is persistence. What do you think? What
I think what's required is more than anything else, courage to be vulnerable and to put what you've created out there for everybody to judge you. And I think that's what holds you back for a long time, because when I left banking, there were two big leaps of courage I had to take. One, to turn my back on a very rewarding pay package. But the more important one was to have the courage to be judged very publicly, not just by my boss and my colleagues and the client, but very publicly about something I have put out there, and to be ready for everything that comes at it. But I think I had come to a point in my life when not doing something was more scary than doing it. So if I hadn't done it, it was just like, I just felt, okay, I really, 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 I'm going to regret not doing it. So I don't mind if I fall flat on my face, I'm going to give this a go. So, and I wish I could have perhaps taken this step a little earlier, but I think it was when I did, I was thick-skinned enough to face whatever came with it. But it's been, I mean, that's what I would tell young girls, that be ready. Vulnerability can be a strength. We always think that you have to always be in charge. Sometimes just reaching out, and this comes straight from Women Inspiring Network again, pay it forward. I reached out to my friend Alpana when I was writing Ambush. She put me in touch with you. You gave me feedback on Ambush. It's just, don't hold back from asking, because there's a world of supportive people out there who will help you. So we always think, oh my God, will they judge me? Will they think I'm 40 and I'm starting a new career? What are they going to think about me? Don't think that. Go ahead and ask. And the friends you make, honor them. And when you can pay it back, pay it forward, pay it back, pay it forward. It's going to be, such a lovely world if we think of it in those terms, rather than let's just get super good and, ourselves and everyone else can clap.
I mean, it's so important to, reach out to the world so that it embraces you back, right? So it's been fantastic chatting, Nayanika. And as we are wrapping up today, it would be great if you could give a couple of last words of inspiration to the Women Inspire Network, girls who are joining us today and who would be listening to your interview.
So maybe just, listen to that little voice inside you. It won't lead you astray. And another favorite of mine, which I tell my daughters, is have courage and be kind. And I think that's what, if I can also remember to follow. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really lovely.
Fantastic, and I'm pleased to be there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nayanika. And it's interesting that you mentioned pay it forward towards the end of your conversation, because that is something which we truly believe in. And, that's exactly the reason which I was telling you earlier, that the Women Inspiring Network took shape. So thank you so much, Amrita and Nayanika, for joining us today. And hopefully we can have you on our platform again sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuti.
See you, Nayanika.